In a world dominated by multiple drivers, especially hybrids, triple hybrid or even quad hybrid, you might be wondering, is there a place for single drivers, especially single dynamic drivers? And my answer to it, absolutely yes. Because many of my favorite IEMs happen to be single drivers, especially single magnetic planar. Such is the case for this very special IEM that I have in my hand right now. It is special because it is made in Malaysia, custom, bespoke, handmade in Malaysia. NotBrand Pursuer of Emotions. And this thing is so special, you can only order it via Facebook and it is priced at 700 US dollar. I actually had the opportunity to try it over years ago. If you have seen my video on it, which is one of the KLI AV video, that was the first time when I had a listen to this Pursuer of Emotions. But at that point of time, the owner, the maker, the one who built, handmade this IM, mentioned to me that it wasn't really completed yet because he is a perfectionist. And by the way, he is my friend. I have known him for quite a while. And knowing him, and if you have seen another video which I did on a blind test, this guy actually had a very good listening ability. I even describe him as having golden ears. And he is a perfectionist, meaning to say that if he's not satisfied with something, he will not release it. In my hand right now, over 1 year from that point onward, we have a final version of NotBrand Pursuer of Emotions. So let's just talk about this single dynamic driver magic. For flagship IEM, and let me remind you, totally handcrafted, bespoke handcrafted. Pursuer of Emotion is kind of a bit simple from the IEM itself all the way to the packaging itself. So let's just have a closer look at the build and the construction. Like I said, it is resin based, and inside you're just going to find a single dynamic driver of 11.5 mm, and it comes included with pin fit Omni ear tip. But I'll talk a bit more on the ear tip later. It is very lightweight, it is also very comfortable, and it seals really well. And the reason for that is very simple. 3 breather holes. So which means that you're not going to get any kind of build-up pressure, like underwater kind of sensation or anything like that. And of course, you will never experience any of that driver flex issue at all. And the cable itself, it is also handmade, custom handmade, entirely constructed of pure silver with some mix of OFC copper, very high quality. And the termination is just at 4.4 mm balance, or you can even request for 3.5 mm single-ended. It is not that thick. It is actually quite good because I am not getting any kind of microphonics as I'm walking like this. No issue at all. With a low impedance rating at just at around 16 to 18 ohm and sensitivity at around 109 dB, Pursuer of Emotion is fairly easy to drive. But I think most importantly is that the question now is that how does it scale with different kind of sources, synergy factor. And when I first used this Pursuer of Emotion attached directly to my Venture Electronic Devastator ultra compact dongle, 4.4 mm balance, I was already getting the kind of sound which I would consider as wholesome. It is full of dynamic authority, it has fair amount of extension, and it is the kind of sound which will be very satisfying to many people. But then, once I scale it with more power, using my favorite dongle which is Time Ear BTE9, then I am hearing an improvement, especially with the sound stage and also with the resolution and the imaging itself, but at least at around perhaps 5%. And when I scale it even higher with 710 milliwatt of power from my Hibi R8 Mark II, then I am hearing the absolute best performance from this Pursuer of Emotion. The most important thing is that it is so very sensitive to different kind of sources. The synergy factor, if you pair it with something which is relatively technical or clinical sounding, then what you're going to get is an output which is very clinical and technical sounding. And it does not emphasize too much on the timbre and tonality. But if you attach it to something like Hibi R8 Mark II, then what you're going to get is something which is very natural, organic and analog sounding, and yet at the same time offering the kind of technicalities which is befitting a flagship IM. So this thing will scale really well with power. Did I mention magical earlier? Yeah, I think I did. And why is it a magical single dynamic driver? So let's just talk about it. Point number one, despite being a single dynamic driver, because it is constructed of beryllium coated dynamic driver, and if you're familiar with beryllium, beryllium coated dynamic driver is known to be very technical sounding. And this is a prime example of how technical single dynamic driver should be. When I first listened to it, I was like really surprised. I was like surprised because at the back of my mind, hey, this thing doesn't sound like single dynamic driver because it offers the kind of resolution, imaging, details, and most importantly, separation and layering, which is normally associated with multiple driver or hybrids. I was able to distinguish different layer of sound, even if the music gets really complex or the music gets really fast paced. There's no congestion, there's no slowness or anything like that. In fact, the speed is pretty much very similar to magnetic planar. Technically very competent, like a magnetic planar, very airy, very wide with the soundstage, but it has that traditional dynamic driver kind of tonality and timbre. Natural, neutral, and fairly organic. I say fairly organic because I do not feel that there's much of coloration at all. In order to achieve something which is warm, organic sounding, you need to be kind of a bit more colored. It offers the kind of upper frequency which offer impressive amount of extension. I was able to hear micro detail, the kind of, let's say, swishiness to the treble itself, if you know what I'm saying. It has that kind of sparkle, it has that kind of pace, rhythm and timing, which is very well defined with the detail itself, but non-offensive, depending on what ear tip you use. And talking about ear tip, okay, I should be talking about this ear tip first, because Pursuer of Emotion is one of those IM which are very sensitive to the type of ear tip you choose to use on them. Like I mentioned earlier, it comes with a SpinFit Omni, which is the default ear tip being included. But after playing with some other ear tips, as per suggested by the maker of this IM itself, true indeed, this thing sounds differently with different kind of ear tips. After doing quite a bit of testing on my own, I have found that this Pursuer of Emotion seems to be pairing really well, having the kind of perfect synergy with this Divinus Velvet. With this Divinus Velvet ear tip, what I'm getting is something which I would consider as very well balanced, being very technical yet musical at the same time. None of those elements are being sacrificed. It is very wide and open sounding, it is very airy, it has the kind of details, the kind of resolution which is impressive, and at the same time, it does not sound clinical at all. And then the mid-range. You see, this Pursuer of Emotion is something which I would consider as a modern V sound curve. It emphasizes a bit more on the upper frequency, it emphasizes a bit more on the lower frequency, but not so much on the mid-range. It is also something which I would classify as being neutral and transparent and uncolored. So if you love your mid-range to be uncolored, for example, like listening to female vocal or male vocal or instrument without any hint of coloration at all, or without any hint of warming or drying, then Pursuer of Emotion perfectly fits the bill. On to the lower frequency. If you are bass lover, or if you are specifically a mid-bass lover like me, then you're just gonna absolutely love this Pursuer of Emotion, because it offers the kind of impact, slam, and presence which is very dominant. It is a bit more dominant than the sub-bass, but the sub-bass itself is not sacrificed. I am still hearing the kind of extension into the lowest frequency of the sub-bass region that I am hearing still micro detail in the lower frequency. So the bass is fast, the bass is tidy, yet it is never overwhelming. It is the kind of lower frequency performance which will be very suitable for any type of music. Anything from rock and metal music, pop music, and even electronic music. And on top of it, I should also mention, it is also super suitable, seemingly super suitable for gaming as well. Comparatively, I dare say that this Pursuer of Emotion can easily compete with many under 1000 US dollar IM, which are hybrid, triple hybrid, or even quad hybrid. Because what I mentioned earlier, being highly technical, amazingly technical sounding, and with amazing balance of musicality, it is definitely tops my recommendation for single dynamic driver. And comparatively, you might be wondering, how does it compete with the rest of the competition in the market? Let's just bring some example to another amazing single dynamic driver, which I really love almost like 2 years ago, which is Final Audio A5000. Now, the reason that I bring up Final Audio A5000 is that because this Pursuer of Emotion reminds me a lot to the kind of dynamism, to the kind of energy, to the kind of speed, to the kind of width, openness of the soundstage that it offers. The main difference is that Final Audio A5000 is a strong V sound curve, meaning to say that it suppresses even more in the mid-range and a lot more prominent in the upper frequency. It is slightly brighter and it is also slightly a bit more bassier. So if you love to have something which is similar to A5000, but you need a bit more of maturity to the sound, with a bit less of sizzle in the upper frequency, with a bit more of smoothness with the decay, this is it. This is the answer to it. And of course, comparatively with something like perhaps similarly priced Soft Ears RS5 Mark II, which I reviewed very recently, which is all balanced amateur, 6 drivers or 5 drivers inside, that is another very impressive IM. The main difference would be, of course, this one will offer a bit more of airiness, but when it comes to technicalities, surprisingly, they are equally matched, despite that RS5 Mark II being a full balanced amateur, and balanced amateur are known to be very detailed, but this thing is as detailed as that. The difference is that, first and foremost, the tonality and timbre, and perhaps the dynamic presentation of that RS5 Mark II, I would even classify as a more linear sounding. From the upper frequency, mid-range, all to the lower frequency, RS5 Mark II admittedly would appear to offer more transparent and more neutral sound, less coloration, especially in the lower frequency. It focuses a bit more on the sub-bass, where this thing is focused a lot more on the mid-bass. And of course, we have something like Dunu DK3001 BD. Surprisingly, admittedly, this thing would be capable of matching Dunu DK3001 BD when it comes to technical performance, because the layering and the separation of this single dynamic driver, let me remind you again, is magical, simply magical. That's how good it is. I am just super impressed. So all in all, should you go for single dynamic driver or specifically single driver? And my say in this is very simple. It does not matter really what kind of driver an IEM is constructed of. Be it single driver, single dynamic driver, single magnetic planar, single electrostatic, single BA, or multiple, many drivers, it is the implementation that matters. And this Pursuer of Emotion is a prime example of single dynamic driver done correctly. You should listen to this. This thing is super amazing. It is magical. Thank you so very much for watching the video until the end. Without skipping, I hope. Now click like and subscribe, and also follow me on Instagram under the name of AndyAV. And also, if you'd like to support me directly, you can join the membership below for behind the scene, especially for AAV Insider and above, which will allow you to see what I am doing behind the scene.